Welcome to the fastest stop in town. Today we select the Zevachim daf Pei Hey. We are going to begin on Pei Hey Amud Aleph by the dot, which is 6 lines from the top. So we're going to learn about the dinim of Me'ilah, which there is a prohibition to get hana from something that belongs to hektish, and in the event that one does, b'shogeg, then there's a chiyuv of having to bring an asher me'ilos, and of course other restrictions or requirements as well. Now, there is a distinction between karbanos when we're dealing with kachi kadashim and kachim kalim. When we're dealing with, for example, kachi kadashim, that is the only time me'ilah really applies. But we're dealing with kachim kalim, for example, a shlamim, a taida, meiser, bechor. So those karbanos, because the Baal has the ability to eat from the meat, as opposed to obviously not an oil, which is kol oil chatas by the koyin, the asham. So the dinim of me'ilah just don't apply. So as that hakdama was said, let's now continue and understand the next piece of Gemara. So Omer Ula. A Mori Kadashim, Kalim, when it comes to the sacrificial parts of Kachim Kalim, that again are going to be burned on the Mizbeach, Sha'olon Lifnei Zrikas Daman. So they were put up before the Zrikas Dam. That's not supposed to be the proper procedure. You're not supposed to burn the Amorim before the Zrika. First, you're supposed to do, again, of course, the Kabbalah Sadam, the Shchita, the Kabbalah, the Hailach, and then the Zrika. And then afterwards, we apply the limbs, the sacrificial parts, onto the Mizbeach. Now we say that even though you did this lo yardu, we're not going to require to remove the imorim, because nasig lach mashil Mizbeach. We say it's considered to be part and parcel of the Mizbeach. Now, the reason, as we said, is because when it comes to Imorim, there's nothing else for it to be done. So there's nothing to do with it, as opposed to, let's say, the Dam, where you actually are supposed to do the Zrika, that becomes a little bit different. But since the Imorim are already up there, we're not going to take them down. Omram Zera. Avanam Tanina, we also have support to this from our Mishnah. It says, Shenishbach Dama, in the event where the blood spilled, so or v'shiyayitza dam chutz l'kilayim, or the dam left the azara. So over there, mahasam de'im bo lizroik. If let's say you wish to do the zrika, ein lo lizrok, you don't have the ability to do the zrika already because let's say the dam spilt or something. Nonetheless, amrit im olu yardu. In that situation, we say that if it went on top of the mizbech lo yardu, so hacha. In these cases, de'im bo lizroik zayrik, when it comes to, again, the shlomim, will koshikain, that those limbs should be able to stay up there because you could still do this rika, right? So you could still do this rika because you just didn't do it yet. So therefore, that should be, again, a proof that im olu yard. Right? So tirguma a kachim kadashim. Maybe the earlier brisa is actually going on kachi kadashim and not kachim kalim. Okay, so let's hold off for 1 second and let's look at Rashi. Shenishbach damul otered habasar im Allah, that the basar will, even if you spilled the blood, we said that the basar will not be taken down. Because like that, the emori kadashim kalim nami koi. That we're thinking about kachim kalim. Uman nishbach dama, when the blood is already spilled. Dahavi elias basar lifnei zrika. Obviously, if the basar was put up, obviously it was lifnei zrika because you weren't able to do the zrika at all because it spilled. The in kan zrika, v'guriya mishar oilin. It's worse lifnei zrika by doing the imorim before the zrika. The hasam imbo lizrok yeshlom al lizrok. You still have dam there. You could still do the zrika. Right? When the blood wasn't spilled, okay, you shouldn't have done this. You shouldn't have brought the morim. The sacrificial part should not have been brought up before the Zrika, okay. So then the day, it's a Raya, Imol Yard. The Gemara says, no, Lav Davka. Maybe it's only talking about Kachi Kedoshim. Says Rashi, Shekadusha Saguf Alehin Lifnei Zrika. Because there's already, when it comes to Kachi Kedoshim, it has upon itself the Kedusha Saguf on the carbon, even before the Zrika. So maybe it's only when it comes to that we say if the busser was put up, even though the blood spilled, but we say over there that Imol Yardu, but maybe not when it comes to Kanshim Kalim, maybe the din is Imol Yardu, if they, again, like by case of a Shlomim. So where it says, 1 second, Har Pesach, the Kedoshim Kalim Hu. Now, it mentions over there in the Seifa that regarding a Pesach and a Chatas. Now, Chatas, okay, is Kachim, but it also talks about Karban Pesach. Now, apparently, it's going on everything else that was said above. So where it says Tigrama Bishlol Shman, it's talking about that Karban Pesach, which is about Shlosh Shma. It's not talking about the Karban Pesach that, for example, the blood spilled or anything like that, or the case of Yoitze. No, it's not the simple reading of the Mishnah. The simple Mishnah reading of the Mishnah is, as we know in Daf Beis, we talk uniquely about the Karban Pesach, Bismanoi, and the Chatas all the time, Davka Shlosh Shma, that you had the wrong intention. That's what it's talking about. Says Rashi, Pesach lo tanile el apsula de b'shlosh shma. That's all it's talking about. Kedetani ba shishachtan shlosh shma. That's all it's talking about. So that doesn't mean that's, so we see a case of Kachim Kalim. No, that's not what it's talking about. Kachim Kalim is only mentioned regarding the Karban Pesach that you had the wrong machshava. It was done shlosh shma. You had a different intention for a different carbon, but it's not talking about the situation where the Imorim were put up and the din. You can't extrapolate from there that when the Imorim were put up in the Zrika, that the Shlomim sacrificial parts, Im Olu Lor Yardu, we don't see that from that. Okay, there's no proof, at least, to support it. Tanan, the cool one, we learned, it says, by all of them, Sha'olu Chayin, L'gamizbech Yardu. If you have an animal that's alive, that is on the top of Mizbech, you have to take it down. Now, it's logical why, because why should you do the Shechita on the top of the Mizbech, even though we saw dinim about Shechita B'Safon, and maybe certain parts of the Mizbech were lenient, as we saw in previous parak, but ideally, if you could do the Shechita in a different location, so then you should do the shechita in a different location. So therefore, and the animal's alive, so like who cares? Just take it down. It's a healthy, perfectly fine animal, and therefore you should be able to just do the shechita down. So it makes sense that yardu, they should come down, which is mashma hashchutin lo yardu. But if it's already shechted, so then we don't want to take it down. Now, we'll obviously maybe it could be a problem of taking it down, especially if there's a problem with that carbon, that if im olu yardu, but we don't really im yardu lo olu, so then taking it down could become problematic because you can't bring it back up afterwards. So maybe just keep it there. So hashchutin lo yardu. So my love, loshna kachim kadashim, loshna kadashim kalim. Even when we're dealing with kachim kalim, the din should be the same. It should not make any difference, and therefore, in either situation, if the imorim of a shlomim are put up before the Zrika Saddam, Imo Yardu. No, lo. Hashchutin mehen yardu mehen lo yardu. It just means if it's shechted, yardu mehen lo yardu. Mehem yardu mehen lo yardu. From them you take down, and from them you don't take down. So what is that referring to? Says Rashi. Let's see if we can get this Rashi. Mishani lo tema. Don't say, this is the first wide line, don't tell me hashchutin kulon lo yardu. El ema, say hashchutin v'yesh mehen yardu, v'yesh mehen lo yardu. There's some that you do take down, some you don't. Kachim Kadashim or Yardu. Kachim Kalim, Yardu. So maybe we could make a distinction between the two. Like it's not clear that by Kadashim Kalim it has the same din. Okay. So that's actually how we're supposed to read it. And that's how Rashi explains it, which spills into the second wide line in Rashi. Okay. Fine. I have a Hakulan Katani. Kulam Achayin. When it says all of them, it doesn't mean including any animal, even Kachim Kalim. It means Achayin. It just means the living animals. Now when it comes to, if it's a living animal, whether it's Kachim or Kachim Kalim, then we say Yardu. But when it comes to, therefore the diak of if it was shechted, that im olu lo yardu, that's only by kachim, by kachim kalim, still yardu. Pshita, says Rashi. So pshita di yardu. I understand. It's obvious that you should take them down. We're talking about a kosher animal, so who cares? Why would you have to do the shechita up top? Of course, take it down. What's the problem? Well, I believe Rabbi Kiva. So it's actually talking about not necessarily this living animal, everything is fine here. Really, maybe there's something wrong with the animal, that the reason the chiddush is Rashi is nakat kulan lashmin and yardu, that this animal is possible, is a mum, even while it's alive. But nonetheless, Rabbi Kiva holds im olu yardu. When it comes to that, we don't take it down. It says Rashi, kashem she'im olu yardu kach im yardu lo yalu. The problem is that when it comes down, you can't bring it up. V'yafil hachi, even though that's true, yardu de'en mizbech mekadesh chayim. I don't care. Even though it's true that it has a cataract or something wrong in its eye, which according to him, im olu yardu, but even though it's true, im olu yardu, im yardu alu. So maybe you shouldn't take this living animal down, because once you take it down, you can't bring it back up. Doesn't make any difference, because the mizbeach is not mekadesh an animal while it's alive. It has to be taken down regardless. That's the chiddush. So b'maya kimta. So what are we establishing this whole thing? We're establishing it bipsulin. So ema seifa. V'chein oyula she'olsa chayil rosh mizbeach. So we're talking about this. The whole chiddush is talking about an animal which has a psul, right? B'dukin shema'ayin. So the seifa says v'chein oyula she'olsa chayil rosh mizbeach terid. If you have an animal which is for a carbon oil, which is alive, you should take it down. The shachta b'rosh mizbeach. If you shecht it on the top, then yavshet we already did it. Then yavshet v'yintach b'mkoima, which is a little bit different than the language of the Mishnah, I believe. But you'll do the hefshet v'netuach, the skinning and the cutting of the limbs right there in its place. Now understand the psula bas hefshet v'netuachi. Understand what you're talking about. How could you do hefshet v'netuach if the carbon oil was puzzle, right? So what is that talking about? Obviously, it shouldn't be talking about a case of puzzle. The says the natach. So let's see the pasuk over here. The hivshit as ola, you skin the oila, v'nitach osal v'nsacheha, and you cut it into pieces. So what do we see from that? Rachmana oisak sheira v'lopsula. Right? It says beferish that it has to be. You only do it to a kosher animal, not to a puzzle animal. So that's actually part of the question. So the answer is obviously seifa tanlik sheira. The seifa talking about an oil where we're telling you to do hefshem b'netuach obviously has to talk about a kosher animal. So my kamashmon. So what's the chiddush there? Diyesh hefshem b'netuach b'rosh mizbeach, that you're allowed to on the mizbeach do this. All right. U'laman diyarme ein hefshem b'netuach b'rosh mizbeach. Now there's an opinion that you can't do that. So my kamimra, what are you gonna say? So that really there was a shasa kosher. The animal was kosher at one point. V'nivsala, and it became puzzle. Rabbi Lezer, Rabbi Shimoni, the Aimer kivanchin nizrak adam. Once you did the zrika, v'hortza basar sha'achas. Even though the basar is mutter, something is fine, even for a moment, then yavshitena v'oyol kahanim. Then you can skin it and the hides go to the Kohanim. In other words, maybe it was kosher, and then afterwards it became possible. Right? It's shaykh that's the case, right? So it is talking maybe about a case of it's possible, but since it had a shasa kosher, then we would allow hefshin netuach. The el diktani ketzad oisa. All right, let's look at question 13. Tanan. Oila she'olsa chayil rosh mizbeach tered. So you should take it down. Since you can shecht it and put it back alive, right? So it makes sense why it says tered. Shecht rosh mizbeach yavshit. So man diami the mayri ba'oila k'sheira. If it's a kosher animal, pshita the tered the hadar salka, right? So the chiddush again is that who says that means you should be able to do the hefshin and tuach there. So man diami the b'ksher mayri k'mash mo the hecha. The nishcha the rosh mizbeach yishem netuach rosh mizbeach of the hadar salka. Okay, so you can do it right there. However, Lamandi Yomer Demari B'Oil Psula Halabas Hemshin Tuachi. So this is not true. Because we're talking about there's a Shasa Kaisher, and in that situation, also as a Shasa Kaisher, it does require Hemshin and Tuach, even though it's possible, and it can still go to the Kohan. Okay. Alright. So the Eldetani Ketzat Oisa, so what do we do? Mayudes Hakir Bayim Lamata. So you're supposed to take the innards and bring them down, okay? So, and this is a Bryce in Zevachim, Rashi quotes, Lamata, Umadichon, and then you rinse it and clean it out. So, Lomali, so why do we need to clean it out? So, Hechinevid, so what else should we be doing? Nirkavinhu Parsaihu, it has the waste. It has waste inside of these innards, and it says "Hakrivuhu no lapichsecha." The pasuk says, as we've quoted many times, that it says that v'hikrivehu no lapichasecha, that when you're makriv, it should be beautiful to its gates. Hayirtzcha, and it should be willing. Ohayisa panecha, oimer Hashem savakos. So anan haki. So again, what do you mean? Oh, why are you rinsing it out? We don't want the pirish, the wastes, and all this stuff on the mizbeach. So of course we want to clean it out. So what's the whole question? No, anan haki kamrina. This is what I was saying. Madich and lamali. Why do we need to do the cleaning? Since it's not going to go back anyway. De'i misrami koyin achrina v'yada naskinhu. So what happens if we're dealing with, again, this non-kosher animal? Person would not know this, and he would think it's actually from a kosher animal, and he may talk into burning it, and that would be obviously problematic. So therefore, the point is, the reason why we do all this is not necessarily because you need to, because it's not a kosher animal, but we have concerns that what if another kohen encounters it and he'll think that it's a kosher animal and he'll end up burning it and therefore becomes problematic. Pay him with bays. V'anan niku nevin l'hul kohanim milsa de'osa b'l'dei takala. Understand? This seems like this is something that also l'dei takala, says Rashi. La'alos psun shiardu, that we're going to maybe end up, because we're doing all this, they may end up putting it back. If you'll hachi adifa, it's better shloi he kachik shemayim mutolim kinevela. We don't want kachik shemayim to be mutal like a nevela. We don't want to treat it badly, that the kirbayim is still inside, the waste is still inside its innards, so we still clean it off because we still want to show an element of respect for this carbon, even though it may actually backfire, because someone may end up actually being makriv and put it back on mizbeach, but we are more concerned about the dignity of kodshim, that it should not look like a nevela. Reb Chia Barabba, Bo Reb Yochanan, he has the following kasha. Emuri kodshim kalim. When it comes to the sacrificial parts of Kedoshim Kalim, for example, and this is what we start off with, let's say Shlomim, Sha'ol if Nezrikas Daman Yardu o Lo Yardu. So basically, again, we're back to our question, what do we say? So Malay, Rabbi Ami V'ti Boilach Me'ila. Understand, if you want to ask me that question, you can ask me also the question, in general, what's the din of Me'ila when it comes to Kachim Kalim? So Malay, Me'ila Lokim Boile. It's not a question. Zrikahu dekavalahu b'me'ila. Until there's zrika, there's not shaykh for me'ila. So therefore, if there was no zrika yet, there's not going to be any din me'ila either. So I'm not concerned about that. Kikim boili b'yirida. I just want to know that if the amorim went up before the zrika sadam, do you have to take it down? Upashit lo yardu ve'ein mehen me'ila. We answer that, in fact, you do not take it down, and there's no din me'ila on Kachim Kalim. Rav Nachman Rabbi Yitzchak Masti Hachim Rav Chiba Rabba Boy Rav Yochanan Emori Kachim Kanam Sha'ol if there's Rikas Daman Yesh Mehen Me'ila Olo. Is there din me'ila? So Malay Rav Ami V'ti Boil Chiri. Don't want you ask, should you take it down? Or Malay you read the Lokim Boili. I don't have a question about that. There's Nasa Lach Mishum Be'ach. I consider again it's not Mechusar Davar, and therefore it's like already been absorbed by the Mizbeach. Kikim boili me'ilo upashad hachi lo yardu ve'in behen me'ilo. Okay. The elu lo hayipsulan v'chulu. So Rav Yochanan lo hisher Rabbi Kiva, as we saw already in the previous Amud, el badukin shiba'ayin. The only time he was lenient of im olu yardu is when it comes to a bal mum which has something wrong with the eye, a cataract in the eye. Hoyel v'ksher b'oifos. Because he's lenient when it comes to birds. Birds in general, we don't have the same concern of a bal mum as by a behema, says Rashi. The pasuk says, Tomim zocher b'bakar b'ksavim tomois v'zachars b'behema v'ein tomos v'zachars b'oifos. Umiu mechusar ever lo mishum hakriva no lepichasecha v'chein mum meguna. That's an important part of the Rashi. We're typically not concerned about a bird which has some small defect. If it's missing a limb, then for sure it's not okay, even though it's just a bird. A behema, we're concerned of the slightest mishap. However, when it comes to birds, we're extremely lenient. And therefore, also when it comes to Badukan Shema'ayin, which is kosher b'oifos, he's going to also say when it comes to an animal im olu yardu. Fine. Viksher b'oifos. V'hu shekadim hikdishon es mumon, and he sanctified it with its mum. Whatever kiva b'oilas nekeva. Now, of course, an oila always is a zachar. It's a male carbon. Always has to be a male carbon. But let's say a person designates a female animal as a carbon ola. In that situation, it's keilu like it came first before it became sanctified. In other words, there was already, as Rashi says, let's get the right words over here. She'olso mizbech tered. So even Rabbi Kiva will say, if you put a nekeva as an oila, v'alfabi deksher b'oifos, you can have a nekeva as a bird, right? It doesn't matter. Even we don't care when it comes to a bird if it's male or female, but we do care, obviously, when it comes to an animal, that when it comes to an oil, it must be a zachar. So therefore, when it comes to a nekeva, even though it's kosher b'oifos, he doesn't care because that is always problematic, right? As Rashi says, the einocha mum gadol mizeh. There's no greater mum than it being, not that we're saying a female is a mum compared to a male, but it's the requisite is so obvious that the animal is a female animal from its birth. And therefore, because of that, it can never be an ola. Mashen can a mum, so maybe it developed this mum later on, but at some point maybe they had a shasa kaisher to eventually could have been brought, even though right now it has a mum. Okay. So by Rav Yirmiyah, yesh nirva b'oifos o ein nirva b'oifos. So he said Raiva v'nirva when it comes to a behema, even im olu yard, you have to take it down because it's even before it entered into the azar, there was always a problem. So how does that work also with birds? So mi amrina min behema lohaitzes Raiva v'nirva. So when it comes to a behema, it excludes the Raiva v'nirva. A person sinned actively or passively with an animal. That animal cannot be used on the mizbeach. Kol hechad isa b'roiva isa b'nirva. Kol hechad leisa b'roiva leisa b'nirva. Right. So a bird can't have basically tashmish with an isha. So it's not considered to be. It's not a possibility. So maybe because of that, there's no din. O dilma hari nevdabo aveira. Right, you can say that still it's still an aveira involved. So therefore, because of that, it also has that din. So again, do we say there's a din of nirva b'oifos or not? So again, because it's not shaykh for a bird to be actively oisik in tashmish with an isha. So therefore, maybe because there's no din like that, so there's also no din. There's no din nirva ba'ofos. Let's just say it that way. So Merabah Tashmar Bikiba Mashir Babali Mumin Bim Isa. If he said that a Bal Mum im Olo Yardu. So Im Isa said Nechsher Nami Benirva. Why doesn't it include that too? However, Kasher ba'ofos, and because it's kasher by just like Badukin Shema'ayin, because it's kasher ba'ofos, so too maybe he should matter nirva because it's kasher ba'ofos. So Shema Minah, that it's obviously not kosher ba'avos, because otherwise he would have mentioned it. Rav Nachman Yitzchak Havanam Tanina had nirva, and we're talking about with a bird. V'amuksa v'nevid v'esan macher v'tumta v'androginus kulan matamid beganim b'beis abliya shmamina. The whole din of being matama beganim b'beis abliya, of swallowing when you eat it, which is you eat it, that's when you become tameh, is only, obviously the din is, that din only applies to a bird. We don't say there's a din tumas magomasa, but rather we say it's tuma beganim b'beis abliya. It's matama your garments when you swallow it. So that's specifically eating from a bird. Rav Chanina Sagana Kohanim B'chulu my Kamashmon. So what's the chiddush? Ibois Emo Ma'isa Kamashmon. He just wants to tell you a lovely story that this is what happened. And therefore, you should know that this is the reality, that he'll take it down. Ibois Emo My Doicha Kleacher Yad. It says Rashi, Vein Maridin Derech Bezoyin Before Hesya. He'll do it like an indirect way, but he didn't want to do it like to make a whole spectacle of it. Kashem Sheim Olu. So it says just like if it goes up, it doesn't go down. So if it goes down, we don't bring it back up. So Omer Ula Lo Shanu Ela Shaloi Mashal Behena Or. That's only if the fire didn't actually catch it already. Avol Mashal Behena Or Yalu. If it already actually came on fire, so then even if it's something that Im Olu, it's only cool Im Olu Yardu, but Im Yardu Olu, then we will bring it up because it's already caught fire. Rav Mari Masni Aresha, Rav Chanina Masur Masni Seifa. What's the Seifa? It's Samos Vaginim. When it comes to the bones and the sinews, Vekarnayim, Vataflayim, when it comes to the horns and the hooves, Mizman Shemechubarim, when they're all attached, Yalu, goes up. Parshu, once it's removed from the animal, Lu Yalu, then we don't put it up. Or Yalu, that it does go up. So Mandamasnu say for this case of the bones, the sinews, that says Im Yardu Olu, if it caught fire, Koshkin Resha. Then certainly in the case of the Resha, where we're talking about the actual carbon up top. Mandamasnu Resha will Seifa La B'nei Hakdarininu. These are parts that have no shaykhis to Hakdaira, so therefore maybe they would hold im yardu lo olu, that we would not put it up even if it caught fire. Okay, we will stop there. We'll take question 14. Boy Rav Yomi yesh nirva b'ofos, oin nirva b'ofos my nifsha di boizu. So we said that there is, and therefore it's puzzle. Machshir bikiva bali mumin the lo yardu Hoyel Viksherim Ba'ofos, which is Dafka B'dukan Shema'ayin, but he doesn't mention anything about Nirva. It must be that he does not hold like that. That it's not kosher Ba'ofos. And that's the proof. Okay, now hopefully we'll see a couple of questions. Yesterday we didn't. Let's see, maybe there's a question here. Kishem Shimo Yardu Kachim Yardu Yalu Amr Ula Lushno Elishul Moshel Ben Or was caught fire of Moshel Ben Or Yalu Alma Amr Ula the Yalu. So what is this referring to? Either it's referring to something which is puzzle on the Mizbeach, or it's talking about the Atzamos V'Gidin, maybe also that. That was TA 5. And maybe now, so actually TB8 is the same question, so let's mark that. That was Pei Hamad Beis. So that's TB8. But, so it was the same question. I wrote Psuli Karbonos, I feel it's almost Gidim Karnayim, V'Tafalayim. Pretty good. V'Talofim. I spelled it wrong. It should be with a tes. V'Talofim. Okay. So I actually did question 7. Let's say this thing. Kishadam Ha'imurim Nifsel B'Yaitze. Right? So this was in yesterday's daf. When it comes to the dam of the sacrificial parts that became possible by bringing out, him amrinan im olu yardu. So I wrote Chanman ne'amr kol ha'yil chamizbeach amrinan olu yardu ve'afilu dam ve'emurim avu yeshma ne'amr shehu lo mar b'hadam. Okay. So again, that was apparently yesterday's daf. Adkan.